AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Año nuevo. Los mismos Extra Value Meals en McDonald's. Ahora te puedes llevar 2 snack wraps y papitas y una bebida mediana por solo $8. Solo por tiempo limitado. Precios y participación pueden variar. Los precios pueden ser más altos en Hawái, Alaska y California y con entrega.
Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts.
Jevon Wooden, welcome to the conversation today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, John. I'm excited for this one.
It is a pleasure to be sitting down with you. You're joining us from the DC area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about integrating empathetic leadership into your strategies. Great topic. I think there's never been a time where, the need for empathy has been higher, it seems.
Yes.
Like we're in a very interesting time and place in history. Very politically divisive, socially divided country at this given point in time, and it's hard to have important conversations when things seem to be so polarized.
Right.
But we lead diverse organizations, and so as leaders, we need to understand how to have empathy, show empathy, model empathy for others around us, and how to really integrate that into our leadership practices, into our organizational and team practices. So that people can feel seen and heard and safe to be who they are and bring, their unique backgrounds to the organization for the benefit of everybody. But in a divisive world, in a polarized world, that's hard to do. So anyways, I think it's going to be a really fun conversation, a lot of great insights in store for the audience today. As we get started, I wanted to share Jevon's bio with everybody. Jevon Wooden is a sought-after speaker, coach, and author specializing in empathetic leadership. A veteran CEO and expert in emotional intelligence and DISC, he empowers leaders to build high-performing teams, foster thriving workplace cultures, and achieve sustainable business growth. Jevon's insights have been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, Inc. magazine, and many more. Again, a pleasure to have you. Anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's important, John, to just allow people, you read a little bit of the background, but allow people to understand that how I landed on this empathetic leadership concept. Mm-hmm. And I landed on it, you mentioned the military, but I was also in tech. My background was in tech. I served in tech as a leader for a while in the corporate setting and in the government setting. Mm-hmm. So what I noticed was the difference between success, failure, high team morale and low team morale, productivity, and all these things that, leaders say they care about was empathy. And it was being able to connect. And even in those difficult conversations, difficult leadership moments, they were able to convey the why, first and foremost, and convey how whatever decision they had to make impacted their teams. And that's something, as you mentioned, is something that's even more important today because a lot of people live in a constant state of uncertainty and fear. So I just wanted to give that context prior to us even diving into this conversation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The complexity, the uncertainty, the fear that's behind so much of the polarization and divisiveness is real. And, so people get into the fight or flight response, right? When they
Mm-hmm.
feel threatened, when they have fear, and your kind of rational brain turns off, and you get into that fight or flight. And then that's when bad things tend to happen. Like that's when bad interactions happen. That's when people snap and lash out and all those sorts
Mm-hmm.
of things. And so like just to be able to recognize and acknowledge, like it's a challenging, tough time for folks in a whole wide variety of ways. And there may be someone sitting across the aisle from me who I disagree with like passionately in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like political, social, economic views, those sorts of things, but they're still a person, they're still a human being. And a lot of their views are probably driven by fear and concern and fear for their futures and the future of their family, their kids, in ways that maybe I don't agree. I don't think those same fears, are things I'm concerned about. But I can acknowledge that that fear exists, and I can acknowledge that that uncertainty exists, and that that's a natural human response, right?
It
And so
is.
having that level of acknowledgement and recognition, and then empathy towards that person who I may completely disagree with on a whole bunch of things, that gives us a chance to like interact with each other in a real human way, an authentic, genuine way where I can see them and be with them and see who they are. And like we're all complex people. We all have good. We all have things that aren't good. Like I'm certainly not perfect. Like I try to do right by others, but like I have blind spots. I'm sure I'm not perfect. And so I can give grace to other people as I hope they give grace to me in terms of how I try to interact with people and try to interact with the world. That's just a very different way of approaching, difference, and people who may see things completely different than me, in ways that I find even reprehensible at times. But I can interact with them in a human way, and that like there's so much better potential for good outcomes in collaboration and teamwork when we can approach things that way than when we just start to like otherize people and start to
Mm-hmm.
label them and start to say, oh, well, they're terrible. And that's the easy way out. And we need to take the more empathetic approach and recognize the good in everyone and find ways to find common ground and to build off that common ground so that we can build towards a common future that's going to be positive for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a lot of great things there, John. And one of the pieces that I want to start with is the component of that rational mind, the cognitive mind. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks like to say that they're rational. I got news for everyone. We're all emotional.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of being human. It could be a gift and a curse depending on how you train and develop that muscle, because it is a skill to be able to kind of, rationalize and kind of regulate yourself to
Yeah.
allow space to be empathetic. And that is the hardest component for a lot of folks, especially if you consider yourself, A-type personality, someone who wants to get their point across, etc. The best thing we can do, though, is understand that your emotional mind processes everything before your rational mind does, about
Yeah.
2 to 5 seconds before. And that is a lot of time to go off the handle, to say something that you shouldn't have said, to do something that you shouldn't have done that you can't take back. So I challenge everyone to place an interrupt between what they think they thought, because it was probably the emotional side, and what they do and how they respond versus react. And to do that, a lot of times it's just what I call the sit breath. The sip breath is
Mhm.
as long enough to take a sip of water. It's about 2 to 5 seconds, depending on who you are. So it allows your cognitive brain to take over. That has been a game changer. When I coach clients, they're like, man, it sounds so simple. But taking a moment to pause and process and ask the questions before I give my statement is one of the most difficult things being a human. So when we talk about giving space to someone else, when we talking about having a respectful dialogue, especially in times of disagreement, it really comes from framing. We need to start reframing our processes and understand that many of our perspectives and our statements come from our beliefs, our experiences, our backgrounds, what we were influenced by. A lot of us don't really understand that. So we need to make that space to say, okay, let me understand your perspective. Let me ask a couple of questions. How did you arrive to that? How did you come up with that? Those types of things. Tell me more about that is one of the most powerful things that we can say. And then that way we use that information to say, okay, I respectfully disagree disagree, and here's why. If you're in a leadership place or statement in your role, you can say, all right, I understand what you're saying, but here's why I need to make this decision and we have to move forward. That changes the dynamic of many conversations. And you can use this with your spouse, with your friends, in corporate, wherever you are. It's really about just taking the moment to be transparent, to be accountable, but to be respectful and tactful in your conversations.
Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate that. And I think again, taking a moment, like we've all heard, sit on that email. Like if you have like a strong response that you're going to send someone in an email response, don't just send it, like sit on it, sleep on it for a day, for a night, and then come back to it. And you'll probably see ways to like moderate things and make sure that you're not going to be counterproductive or you're not going to hurt relationships or whatever in unnecessary ways. The sip test, like literally it's the same idea. It's just faster. And it just that basic opportunity to pause briefly or take a few deep breaths or whatever, right? Like to just not have that initial response in times of tension and difficulty. It can make all the difference in the world. So that self-regulation, like you said, is really, really important. Just recognize we're all human. Like we all deal with this, right? And the difference between whether or not you're going to fly off the handle in immediate response to something or have a more measured, productive response to something often is just your self-regulation practices. And that's a muscle you can build over time. Like maybe it's not something you're used to. Maybe it's not, how you were brought up or in your home it was different or, what, like we can all say all these different things and maybe a cultural difference or whatever. But like ultimately we can all build that and develop that skill and that muscle so that we have better self-regulation, self-emotional regulation. And we can still honor the emotions that we have, but we can also not be held captive by the emotions that we have.
Right.
Because our emotions aren't always rooted in reality. Like it's my perception of like interactions with people. And sometimes my perceptions and all the stuff that's going on in my brain and my own baggage and like all these different things influence how I'm going to interpret stuff. And then what my initial reaction is going to be to things. And, sometimes those may be completely, in tune and accurate and everything. But a lot of times there's at least an opportunity for us to pause, take a deep breath and reevaluate and see, is there another way to look at this? Is there another framing? Is there another perspective? Can I try to give a more human motivation behind, the person who just did this to me and rather than jumping to conclusions about how horrible they are? Like all of that just helps us to have more productive conversations. And that's not to say that sometimes there are just horrible people. Sometimes there are terrible people that intentionally do horrible things. So we do have to be protective. We don't want to put ourselves into abusive environments, and we do need to find ways to remove ourselves and put up boundaries and remove ourselves from those environments. But for the vast majority of people, in the vast majority of interactions, I just do not believe that there's ill intent behind a lot of those things. It's just the natural human emotional response that maybe we're not self-regulating very well. And we could be far more productive on it. I think most people wake up in the morning just wanting to get through their day, just wanting to do right by others, wanting to, have a happy, successful, fulfilling day. And then lots of stuff gets in your way, and then you get frustrated and then you get angry and then like there's all sorts of things that can derail you. And we all go through that each and every day. And so just being able to come to the difficulties with a little bit broader perspective can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, you know what's beautiful about empathy, John, is empathy. You really cannot be empathetic if you are not self-aware and you do not have self-care. And I say that because empathy, a lot of people misconceive, they misperception. They have a misperception on what it is. They think that empathy and people pleasing are the same thing. And they're two different things.
Very different.
Empathy is being comfortable with self, but allowing room to say, all right, I know I don't know everything, and I know my way is not the only way. I know my experiences are not the only experiences. Let me be open to listen and learn. Let me be curious. And that's really where that stepping away you mentioned, when you talk about protecting your energy, you're not going to stay there and listen to someone who's denigrating or belittling you. What you're going to say is, in my empathetic tone, I'm going to say, I respectfully disagree. And and I see that you are not in a position to have this dialogue and this conversation. So I'm going to remove myself here. I hope you have a great day. You said, instead of cussing them out, you said the same thing in a better tone. And that's what I love about it. It's still saying exactly what you wanted to say, but understanding, like you said, that there is a human you're speaking with, whether they are what you may perceive as a bad human or not. You still can say it and save your face, because what you don't want to do as an empathetic person is you do not want that person to get you out of character. You do not want to allow that person to have that type of control over you. And that's why what we're talking about is so important here. Empathy means that you have to be so comfortable with yourself that you can approach a situation and a circumstance with a different lens no matter what's happening. You're going to take that high ground and you're going to say what you want to say. Not going to let somebody run over you, but you're going to ensure you do everything respectfully and tactfully. Because what happens if we don't is we go off and we say, oh man, I wish I would have said something different. I should not have allowed that person to get me out of character or get me upset. And that's the beauty of what we're talking about here. Same facts, different approach, and you get completely different results. Because once you say that to that person, like, hey, I see that you're not in position, I'm going to move on, have a nice day. Now they're going to go on and be like, dang, maybe I was, being a butthole on that approach, or you know what, maybe I need to evaluate myself. So you want to be able to do that and have that type of power over self so that you can make a positive impact in some way, because hopefully you're the catalyst for change.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting, in terms of like social, cultural, political polarization, one thing that I just didn't think would become a thing, but it has, is like in some circles, an attack on empathy. Elon Musk famously said recently that he thinks, the something to the effect of like the biggest weakness of modern civilization is empathy. Like there's definitely a contingent that thinks empathy is weak, that empathy is a detriment. I think you've already helped to reframe it in a way that maybe even people who might, agree with that might be able to see, okay, there's really important value here. But like, how would you respond to a Musk or someone who has that kind of a way of understanding the world? Like, not only, I strongly believe not only is empathy not the biggest weakness of modern civilization, it should be and can be the biggest strength of modern civilization. And so, if you have me and Musk in a room together and we have diametrically opposed views on something as what I would think is fundamental to humanity as empathy, like how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, the first thing is folks have to be open. I highly believe that you can't argue with fools, because from a distance, people can't tell who is who. So with a Musk, he is not open to hearing about empathy. So I wouldn't even entertain the conversation, because I'm just going to be wasting my breath. But with someone who is curious and maybe misguided on it, then I will have that conversation. I would ask them first, like, what are your thoughts on empathy? And this is something I do when I come into environments that are not really known to be emotionally intelligent. Like I do a lot of work in construction, for example. My first question to them is, what are your thoughts on empathy? Right? What are your viewpoints? Do you think it's useful at all? Do you find it useful sometimes? Do you think it's beneficial all the time? And what does it look like? I need to understand from their perspective, what do they feel it is? And that's why I said earlier, most people think being empathetic is people pleasing. So then I have to reframe like I did earlier. I have to say, yeah, okay, I understand that your perception is empathy is being weak. Your perception of empathy is relinquishing control. Your perception of empathy is maybe, kind of coddling people. Well, empathy actually is looks different in circumstances. So being empathetic to one person may mean I'm giving them a little bit of tough love. Being empathetic to the other person may mean that I take a softer approach, but I need to learn that person. And the only way for me to learn that person is to understand their experiences and where they come from and why they behave a certain way. Everything we're talking about here is pattern recognition, right? Our patterns and the patterns of others. So if I can understand that, I can first understand my triggers, my biases, my blind spots, things that impact the way I handle certain things. And then I come to this person and say, hey, I know that this person typically approaches things in a brash way, or they don't like to listen, or whatever it is. Then I'm going to approach with an empathetic lens from a different standpoint. So that's first and foremost. And when I do that, and when I take the time to listen before I ever utter a word of guidance or a statement, they understand that, okay, we're in a space, we're in a spot where I'm not to be judged, and we can listen and talk respectfully. And that's what I look to establish with everyone. First, I need to establish that rapport with them. I need to give them space to understand that, hey, we are here to have a respectful conversation. I'm not going to denigrate you or say anything off the rails to you. I expect the same thing. If you do not give that to me, my empathetic lens is going to say, hey, what you just said made me feel this way. I would appreciate if. That's my first statement. Everything I do is about respect from an empathetic lens. But I'm also going to make sure we establish a contract during our conversation that if you do break that respect or that trust, then I'm going to acknowledge it and I'm going to let you know. Then we can move forward. So that's what I like to do with people who kind of have that different lens is I want them to understand and hear themselves. Because once they hear themselves, they can start introspecting. And then I'm going to mirror it. So what you're saying is you believe empathy is not effective because you believe that it means that you're weak and you're not going to stand up for yourself. Is that a fair assessment? They're going to say yes or no, right? So I
Yeah,
want to make
yeah.
sure I'm playing it back so they can hear it externally, because sometimes that's what it takes for them to have that aha, like, you know what, that actually does not make sense what I just said. Right. And that's how we go back and forth and we just have that dialogue. And because I feel like a lot of folks who have a negative lens or a negative association with empathy is just because that the environments they've been in have assimilated them to thinking to a certain way of thinking. So if we can open and we can just have one little crack in that thought, then we have a game plan. We can continue to have this conversation and allow them to see. And then another thing that I like to do is I like to bring in facts. I don't want to just go off of feelings because that's what their challenge to it is. Like, oh, it's just feelings. So I bring in facts, and I bring in facts based on their situation. For example, construction, I'm going to keep going with this one. Construction has the second highest suicide rate. They have the highest substance abuse rate. They have one of the highest workplace violence rates. What does that tell you? They don't have a very empathetic culture, and their people do not feel comfortable sharing when they're having issues, and they're not very supportive. So those types of things, you can't argue with it because it's a fact. I can literally go to the National Association of Health and show you these things. So that's what I like to do.
No, I like that. Yeah, just having an open conversation with folks. Also, holding to your boundaries. Like you don't need to put yourself in peril. You don't need to put yourself in
Mm-hmm.
a position of abuse, verbal abuse or emotional abuse or whatever. And save your energy and focus on conversations that can matter. And this is one reason why I think a lot of times like online debates, like going into chat rooms, going into the comments of a news story or social media debates, why they're kind of often pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes all they do is cause retrenchment as people, find themselves in an echo chamber, and then they seek out confirmation by it. They have confirmation bias. They seek out things to confirm what they already believe. And when they feel attacked, they just retrench further, more deeply into what they think. And there's not a lot of space in kind of a more anonymized online environment to have these types of debates, especially with someone who has no interest in actually being intellectually curious and trying to understand where the other person's coming from, who has that intellectual humility and is willing to have that self-reflection. That's hard to do in person, but it's even harder to do in a more anonymized, separated online environment where you can totally dehumanize someone on the other side of the
Mm-hmm.
screen in your head, right? And so I think all of that's really great advice. And a really important thing to remember as we're having these conversations with folks, so that we can be as healthy and productive as possible as we try to move forward. Because I don't believe in throwing my hands in the air. Like just
Mm-hmm.
because we're polarized, more polarized than we've almost ever been, perhaps, at least in recent history. Even though we're polarized, I refuse to throw my hands in the air and just say, well, they're a lost cause. There's no point in even having any more conversations with anybody, because I'm like, are there quote unquote lost causes? Are there people who are just so shut off from any dialogue, any intellectual curiosity around topics? Sure, those people exist, but I think the vast majority of people are willing to have conversations, and the vast majority of people are willing to have respectful dialogue, and at least on the edges explore and challenge their thinking a little bit. You're not going to turn someone from one worldview to a different worldview overnight.
Mm-hmm.
nor should we even really try, right? Like, but you can inform, you can use data, you can have meaningful conversations where you're treating the other person with dignity and respect, even when you disagree. And all of that over time could cause someone to shift or at least be open to, a different perspective. And
Absolutely.
that's hugely valuable. Like if we could get back, I don't need people to agree with me. I just want to get back to a society where we can disagree respectfully. And I can acknowledge, like, yeah, smart, intelligent, well-intentioned people can see the world in vastly different ways than I do, and they can have a vastly different perspective on like the best path forward than what I hold. But we can have those conversations and lean into the discomfort of those conversations and still do it in a respectful way,
Absolutely.
where I can still acknowledge the humanity of that person sitting across the table from me. And we can still, we can still be pals, we can still be buddies, we can still have relationships, even when there are disagreements. So not putting our head in the sand, not throwing our hands in the air and just saying, oh, it's a lost cause, there's nothing we can do. Like but continue to do the hard work of like trying to have these conversations with folks. I think is just really, really important. Noting that, yes, we need to protect our energy. We need to we can't change the world overnight. Like we can't, all those things are also real, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I stand on this hill of empathy and vulnerability being strength, because when you're
Yeah.
empathetic, there's a lens of or a component of vulnerability that's very important there, because you're going to run into people who have polarized views. You're going to run into people who say, that's fluff. You're going to run into people who have, whatever type of perspective that is the exact opposite, the antithesis to your perspective. And it is important to have conversations, but what I will say is, people we have our job as you and I and others who believe that empathy is a catalyst for positivity, but also a catalyst for really moving forward in this world, is to continue to have these dialogues on the grand stage like we're doing right here, continue to represent empathy when we're in rooms and spaces, when we're having conversations. And yes, we can challenge one to one. But another thing that's really, really important is for us to understand that it's going to take a concerted effort. If we are to challenge those who are even on the large stage saying these things about empathy and about, humanity and all those things, it's going to take an army of us, right? So what I would say to the listeners is, if this is resonating with you and you agree with us, do us a favor and share these types of conversations. Put us in rooms where we can have more dialogue with others who may even challenge this notion. That's what's going to be the catalyst for change. Because I love what you said. You don't throw your hands up. And even with Elon, I'm not saying I would throw my hands up with him, but the key is to identify when someone's actually open to the conversation, or they're just so stuck in what they believe that maybe I'm not the voice for them. But if we create an army of voices, maybe one of those can get through and be that change. And I am completely fine with that. And I love the fact that you brought that up, right? We just have to understand that it's not going to happen with just a singular person. It's going to take all of us speeding and stating these things and sharing one another's posts and being in one another's platforms, sharing platforms in order for us to get back on the right track, because we have regressed as a people, as a culture, as a nation, as just, and I understand it. And the reason why I understand it is because people have been tired of certain things for a long time, and people were just so willing to try anything. You know what I mean? So I get it. But now that we've tried something, now we see the impact of it. Let's get back on the right track. Let's start treating one another with respect. Let's not hide behind our alter egos online, posting random stuff, creating accounts where we're absolutely destroying people like they're not a human. Let's be honest. let's step up as our authentic selves. Let's not hide behind, alter names. Let's be real about it, and let's be real about these conversations. That's the only way we're going to win.
I love it. Jevon, this has just been a really great conversation. There's certainly a lot more we could go into on this topic, but I think that's been a great dialogue for today. I do note the time. I need to let you go, but before we wrap things up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word for today.
Yeah, absolutely. John, well, first and foremost, thanks for having me once again, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I knew we could have talked for hours on this topic, but I appreciate you. And if you want to connect with me, you can go to JevonWooden.com and just reach out to me on socials. LinkedIn is my number one platform. You can search my name, and I'll pop up. Say hello. Tell me that you heard me here, and I would be happy to start a conversation with you. And then the final word is exactly what I just said. Take this. Don't just listen to it, but take action. And the action is sharing this episode, sharing this conversation. Reaching out to us, letting us know where we can be, sharing your thoughts on the topics. That's how we're going to move forward. So that's my word of the day.
Awesome. Wonderful. Jevon, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Jevon can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.